Portugal to Poland. In retrospect, it seems to have been more conscious on my part than perhaps it was at the time, but there came a stage where I took refuge in travel. To adapt what Cavafy says about the barbarians, this was a solution of various kinds. It removed me from a London that was often dank and second-rate. It kindled in me a resolution which I have tried to keep ever since, to spend at least once every year a little time in a country less fortunate than my own. If this doesn't stop you getting fat, it can at least help prevent you from getting too soft. And in the period I am writing about, it allowed me to continue seeing the left as a force that was still struggling for first principles against the traditional foes. I would be indignant if anyone were to describe this as romantic, a term that we were especially educated to despise in the International Socialists, even though I now think that there may be more reprehensible words. But if you exempt a solidarity trip that I took to express support for the Icelandic socialists who were fighting to stop British trawlers from hoovering up all their fish, and Iceland is an exotic locale of its own, with its moonscape interior and geyser-supplied hot water, with the ever-present diabolical whiff of sulfur. It is true that the impulse generally led me to the south and to the Mediterranean and to the Levant. One of the many great hopes of 1968 had been to complete the unfinished business of the Second World War and cleanse Spain and Portugal of their antique fascist regimes. Not only had this ambition not been realized, but another dictatorship of the right had been imposed on Greece and then spread, with calamitous results to the independent Republic of Cyprus. The drama extended across both sides of the Pillars of Hercules. Franco's Spain made a free gift of its Western Sahara colonial possession to the absolutist monarchy in Morocco, leaving the population voiceless in its own destiny. It also extended to the extreme opposite end of the Mediterranean, where an Israeli-Jewish opposition to the occupation of Palestinian land was beginning to take shape, and where in Lebanon an alliance of secular and Palestinian forces was emerging to challenge the old confession-based hierarchy. A whole anthology of images survives vividly in my mind from this time. A spontaneous riot on the broad Ramblas of Barcelona, after the last ever use of the hideous medieval garrote from the judicial murder of a Catalan antichrist named Salvador Puig Antich. The illegal Catalan flag proudly flown, and a shower of gasoline bombs falling on Franco's military police. A journey to Guernica, a place name that I could hardly believe corresponded to an actual living town, to rendezvous with Basque activists. A weekend in the Latin Quarter in Paris, complete with the telephone passwords and anonymous handshakes in corner zinc bars, so that I could meet a Portuguese resistance leader named Palma Inácio, who was engaged in organizing an armed battle against the dictatorship in Lisbon. Some long, hot, and fragrant days in Tyre and Sidon, and points south of Beirut, meeting with militants of the Democratic Front, who, over lunch in the olive groves, would patiently explain to me that Jews and Arabs were brothers under the skin, and that only imperialism was really the problem. Standing in Freedom Square in Nicosia, among a roaring crowd of demonstrators, many of whom had recently fought with gun in hand against the Greek junta's attempt to annex Cyprus, but whose voices could also be heard over the impermeable wall that the invading Turkish army had built right across a free city. I liked all this for its elemental headiness. It seemed to go so well with different blends of wine and raki. But also for its seriousness, politics in these latitudes being a game played for keeps, and for its immediate and intense connection to history. I felt I knew the Ramblas from Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, in Algiers after returning from an expedition with the Polisario guerrillas fighting in the Sahara. I thought I also had at least a vicarious glimpse of the continuation of an old struggle for the soul of North Africa that had once involved Camus and Sartre. As for Cyprus, where I fell so hard in love with the island and the people, and with the very place names, Famagusta, Larnaca, Limassol, Kyrenia, and with one very dramatic and life-altering Cypriot. It was not the Philhellenic tradition, the very one that had helped revive British radicalism more than a century before. Today I want to puke when I hear the word radical, applied so slothfully and stupidly to Islamist murderers, the most plainly reactionary people in the world. The alteration of perspective was the most useful thing. In Northern Europe it was, roughly speaking, a case of Free West versus the satellite states of the East. In Cyprus, though, the illegal occupying power was a member of NATO. In Portugal, the fascist regime itself was a member of NATO. Likewise, in the case of Greece, in Spain the main external relationship of the system was with Washington. Thus it was possible to meet communists who, in these special circumstances, not only made sense but had heroic records and were respected popular figures. In Cyprus, at a very red flag rally, where I was among the platform speakers, I had the distinct honor of shaking the hand of Manolis Glezos, who had given the signal for revolt in Athens in 1944 by climbing up the Parthenon and tearing a swastika flag from the pediment. Not a bad day's work, I think you'll agree. However, of Comrade Glezos, it also had to be said that he had once run a bookstore in Athens that largely featured the work of Enver Hoxha of Albania, possibly the most Aztec-like of all Europe's remaining Stalinists. And I hadn't forgotten the second great promise of 1968, which was that of solidarity with the forces of dissent in the other Europe, the nations of the East and the Baltic, who had been stranded and frozen in time ever since the Yalta Agreement permitted the partition of the continent. Thus, for me, the three most important episodes from this epoch are the stirrings of revolution in Portugal and in Poland, and the experience of counter-revolution in Argentina.